All right, now coming out of the myth of Gyges, though, is another ethical tradition, but reacts against that the myth, taking the myth as a cautionary tale or as a statement about human nature that ethics has to fight against for the achievement of certain other values. The predatory ethic takes the myth of Gyges as a true statement of the human condition, but embraces it and doesn't then see a conflict between ethical values and human nature. So erase this part here just to make a little bit of room here. I will put a box around predation, and I will switch colors to blue just to draw out some different implications and to contrast a third position with the predatory ethic here as well. All right, so suppose we take this to be a true picture of human nature, add power, we're necessarily going to get zero-sum social interactions, or what we can call crimes. But rather than, as the predatory ethic is satisfied with that, or makes no bones about it and makes its peace with it, so to speak, we take that to be a bad thing. And so we make our first value judgment here, which is to say that crime is bad. Because if we have criminal behavior or antisocial behavior of this sort prevalent in society, then what happens is that society, right, breaks down. We cannot have social living, commerce, friendship, family relationships, of the best kind if we don't have social structure, and crime undercuts social structure, so therefore crime is a bad thing. So then the question is going to be, if we want to have society but crime is an obstacle to it, then in some way we need to stop crime. That pushes us back here. If crime is a result of two factors, the availability of power combined with human nature, then one of these two things has to be addressed. Now, chances are very good that we're going to say we're not going to be able to change human nature. This is a constant. People are constituted by greed, lust, revenge, and various other desires. So the thing that we have to focus on then is this issue of the distribution of power. So if we then say, as a result, society's breaking down is bad, and that is led to by human nature, it's going to be the combination of human nature and power that is the bad thing that then has to be addressed. So what we're then going to have to say is that the more important thing, or that it is more important to have society than for individuals to be able to satisfy their desires whenever they want. If there's a conflict between the satisfaction of desires and the needs of society, then it's the satisfaction of desires that has to give way. Then the satisfaction of individual desires. Okay. And this way of analyzing the situation then is going to be to say that we have a conflict then between what's good for the individual and what's good for society. And the question is going to be, how can we then, when necessary, stop or restrain the satisfaction of individual desires enough so that we can get the kind of social harmony that we need. Now, there are two broad approaches that are possible here. One is a political approach. We can say that what we will then have to do is have various sorts of external restraints. We might have a very strong police power, for example, in which a great deal of power is concentrated, and so that the power that the government has in its police force is much more powerful than any individual has, and so as a result, people will fear, right, the police, and it will be the fear of the police that will restrain them from using whatever power they still have available to them, and so that they won't act in a criminal way, right, as much as possible. Now, we're not going to focus on political issues in this course. Instead, we're focusing on ethical issues. What we want is for people internally to restrain themselves so that they don't act on human desires, and teach a certain ethical code that people will hopefully internalize. And if they do that, internalize it to the extent that they do internalize it, they will restrain their own desires and not act on them, and then social living here will be possible. Now, what we then need are internal checks or internalizations of certain ethical prohibitions that will cause people voluntarily to regulate their behavior. And to specify the kinds of ethical prohibitions or internalizable checks that we want, the ones that are going to work here are going to be ones that attack, in this case, the ones that are the desires that are the most dangerous, the most likely to be antisocial ones. So, for example, if we take greed, we say, all right, sure, people are greedy by nature. We're not going to change that fact about them. But what we can do in our ethics education is right from day one, as soon as we see various sorts of greedy behaviors and greedy desires manifesting themselves, we will take that as an opportunity for a moral lesson to teach the child something about wealth, acquisitiveness, money, property right, and so forth. So if we think, for example, of religious traditions, many religious traditions that have a very similar view of human nature will start saying things like, it will be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. So the idea here then is a rich person is not very likely then to get into heaven, because being a rich person involves certain kinds of immoralities. And to the extent that the child believes that, or comes to believe that, he or she then is less likely to pursue a life path that involves acquiring riches. Or we might say something like, the love of money is the root of all evil. To the extent that a student believes that the love of money is the root of all evil, it's not going to change the fact that he is attracted by money, but he's going to have this belief that loving money is problematic, and he's then more likely to restrain his acquisitive desire to a certain extent.